Hey everybody, it's Chris Kirkpatrick with Life 180, and welcome back to this week's edition of Personal Finances for Canadians, I guess is what we're going to call this for fun. But I'm here with Galen Nuttall from Canada, and he is a financial expert in Canada, and I think we're going to be talking about I guess, a topic that it's funny because it's not as relevant in the United States as it is in Canada. Although, you want to hear something that happened today, Galen?
Go for
They
it.
were talking on a Guardian webinar that I got to hear. They're taking capital gains taxes in the United States that have during the Trump era were taxed on a sliding scale anywhere from 0 to 20%. And all capital gains taxes are moving in the United States now because of Joe Biden. Most likely, it's not 100% pass through, but it's looking like it is, to 39.6%. So that's pretty impactful. More lock in step with Canada ways of doing things. And I mean, but when you're $30 trillion in debt, you got to pay for it somehow, right? So, but that's the U.S. This is for Canada, so we'll get back to this. So talk to me about kind of what we're going over today.
Yeah, for sure. So as you've mentioned, I mean, it's interesting. So you said the sliding scale changing, which is obviously going to impact a lot of people who have capital gains. In Canada, it is 50% right now, like all of it. There's no sliding scale.
All of it?
All of it, 50%. I'll go into a little bit more detail around that. But in general, estate planning in Canada is definitely no joke, especially compared to the United States. Like I do read and watch stuff out of the United States. And a bit ago, I saw someone writing in the States and they said, well, if anyone's trying to get you to buy whole life insurance because you're going to have an estate bill, you probably won't be paying any estate taxes. They're probably overselling this product to you. And I was like, what? And like they were talking about some rule, like step up rule or something. I don't even know what they were talking about. But I was like, whatever you're talking about does not exist in Canada, because when I sit in front of Canadians, they are routinely looking at a tax bill in the neighborhood of 30 to 50% or beyond of all the income, all the savings, when it all gets added up and kind of lumped together. And so basically, and people are usually shocked by this, like it is consistent when I sit in front of people who have a bunch of money in their RSPs, which is arguably the most popular place for people to save money in Canada for investing, is inside of the RSP. They get a lovely tax deduction up front or tax credit up front, but all the money that comes out is taxable. And if you do that over a period of years, it's not that big of a deal.
Right.
But if you do it all at once, it's a big deal. It's like getting a giant paycheck on one day and having to deal with the taxes from it. So I work with people over a series of strategies. If they're young enough, we talk about how not to get into this situation to begin with. And if I've met them closer to retirement or in retirement where they've already got this problem, we look at how to solve this problem through like a multi-step process to get them from the fully taxable world to either the tax-free world or somewhere in between, but like as much as we can. And the big thing is, if someone isn't planning, they have no control over what's going to happen. Like that's what I really show to people is I say, look, if you've got an idea of who you want to send this money to, whether it's children, grandchildren, other loved ones, church or charity, if you get a plan together, you're going to have some say into how this goes down. But people who don't have plans, they just have to do what's the default, which is what the government's going to decide happens to their money.
That's crazy. So I guess, I mean, that's way different. Yeah, because there are step ups in the United States. I'm not sure what the Biden administration is doing to all that in the estate planning. I can only assume it's going to be impacted because everything else is getting impacted and they're just looking for money. But I will say this is like, it seems like the benefit of, so I guess every positive thing comes with like a negative like element to it as well. Like there's nothing that's just all good. And so like Canada has higher taxes. That's the negative side, right? But the good side is like, from what I've seen is Canadian rules and like regulations, it's much cleaner. It's much more simple, right? Like there's not as many loopholes, there's not as many moving parts. And like, so from a planning perspective, I know one of the challenges when there's so many options, it's kind of like if you give somebody too many options, they do nothing with it all, right? And like, so from at least like if you're out there and you're thinking about like, what do I have to do to plan? You don't have all these options to contemplate. It's just like the rules are the rules are the rules. There's not as many loopholes. So just figure out what path you need to do and what's the most effective. for you is going to be the most effective for the person making $2 million a year, which in the United States is not, I mean, granted, there's going to be nuances in that, I'm sure, as well. So I don't want to make a blanket statement, but in the United States, nothing could be further from the truth. Like the guy making $2 million a year and the guy making $100,000 a year have polar different, like the ideas that they even have to deal with capital gains on any level. A person making 100 is probably not going to have to deal with it at all, versus the person at 200 million. It's going to be a bigger bill. So I think that's great that it's simple. And so the question from here forward is like, what do you do? Like,
yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I would say it's fairly like, I mean, at least I've I've been doing it long enough to learn how to make it simple. If it's because it can seem complex, like the word estate planning and like all these words like capital gains and deemed disposition and all these fancy words. Like at the end of the day, it is fairly simple, and I can map out exactly like I'll start mapping out exactly what it looks like and what I help people do. And the first thing I'll talk about though is the problem. Like, so most people I sit in front of, who have this problem are completely unaware of it. They've been going to an advisor whose main focus has been, what kind of rate of return can we get? Maximize your RSPs. Let's just keep doing this.
Yep.
And they never talk about the fact that when you get to a certain age, you're actually going to look at this and be like, holy cow, do I have too much money in this thing? Like, am I exposed to a big potential risk? And the first thing I ask people is I say, would you put your money somewhere where you could lose half the value in one day? Like, would you invest in something that this has happened to a lot of people before where they lost half the value in one day? The vast majority of people would say absolutely not, especially retirees. Like, I don't know a lot of retirees who'd be like, yeah, sure, lose half the value, whatever. Like, they say no. But when they put the money in the RSP, a lot of people end up in this position. And I'm not saying RSPs are bad. I think they're fine. It's more of being aware of the problem and what you can do ahead of time to mitigate it, or what you can do if it's already there. And I've helped people in every rule of that situation, like every range of that. Okay. And I think the other big thing I'll say before I open up the whiteboard is a lot of people just assume their family or their advisor has this figured out, and nothing could be further from the truth. Like, I see people who are like, oh yeah, my grandfather's a savvy businessman, or I've even seen cases where it's like, oh yeah, no, my dad is a banker. He knows these things.
Yeah.
Behind closed doors, either I'm meeting with this person and finding out that they do not know this, or I'm finding out too late from the family, because they're coming to me after the person's passed away and they're like, is there anything we can do to fix this problem? And I'm like, once you've passed away, there's not a lot you can do. It all has to be done ahead of time. Yep. And I mean, I'm actually genuinely surprised at the things I see people do, because they've read something and they think it's a good idea, or they've got a buddy doing it and they think it's a good idea, and it's actually can be a horrific idea. So I'm always telling people, go talk to a financial planner who's had some experience with estate planning and understands the ins and outs of this. So yeah, it's a very common problem that people are fairly unaware of.
Gotcha. That's interesting. All right. So I'm excited to see this.
Yeah. So I'm going to share it. So we're going to talk a lot about, like I said, like the RSP is probably the most popular place for people historically to put their money away for long-term savings, retirement planning. And I've talked about this in a previous video, but just to make it like abundantly clear, let's just say someone makes $100,000 in a given year. If they put $10,000 inside of their RSP, they're only going to pay taxes on the $90,000 of income. So that $10,000 doesn't count towards that year's income. So it's people get what's deferred. Yes, it's tax deferred. So they get a tax credit on that money. They don't pay taxes on it that year. When they go to take it out in retirement, yes, they're going to go pay taxes on it. And most people I work with are going to have a lower income in retirement than while they're working. So it really does make some sense. Like, while people are working in Canada, it's very common for people to be in the 30, 40, 50% tax bracket. In retirement, that's much less common unless they've got a big old pension. And that's I don't work with a lot of people who have pensions. I have a few clients who have pensions. Most of my clients are self-employed entrepreneurs, and they've got to find a way to save money somewhere and save some taxes.
You try to help them create their own pension.
Exactly. I hope people create their own pensions, especially if there's a corporation involved. And I'm not going to talk a lot about the corporation today, but if there's a corporation involved, the RSP can still make sense. But there's a whole nother series of tools like the individual pension plan, corporately held life insurance, where I create pensions for people. So the RSP, you put the money in, you get the tax deferral, so you get a tax credit here. And then, this could be someone that's 40 years old gets that tax credit, and they don't have to worry about the taxes until they're 71 when they're forced to take it back out.
Right, because that
and then
money
you
will
get taxed.
grow tax deferred, right? And
Exactly.
then you're able to pull from that money. But when you pull from it in retirement, it is taxed as earned income at that time.
Exactly. And you're at age 71 is when you have to start taking it out. And the theory behind it is as you're taking it out and drawing it down, by the time you get into your 90s, it's probably going to be pretty, because there's a formula of you have to take out a minimum amount every year, and the
Mm-hmm.
amount goes up every year. So by the time you're in your 90s, it's pretty well, it's not depleted completely for everyone, but it's much lower than when you started, just because they're forcing you to take out more every year.
Mm-hmm.
So passing away over here is not as big a deal. But passing away here is a big deal, because that's when there's or anywhere before that, that's when the maximum amount is in. That's because taxes, if you're taking out bit by bit every year, maybe you're only paying 20-30% taxes on it. But if you had to take it all out at once, I'll talk about how you get to the 50% pretty
Yeah.
fast.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, a lot of people are confused because they'll say, okay, so if it's spouse to spouse, it's usually not an issue. Spouse named spouse as beneficiary. That RSP, even if it's got $1 million in it, it's going to roll over and it's not going to be a problem. That's how most spouses have things set up, unless they're like, I've met people who it's their second marriage. They have kids from a previous marriage. They keep their finances separate. That's a
Mm-hmm.
different ballgame. But spouse to spouse, generally, you can just say, hey, like my case, if I were to pass away, my wife would take over my RSP, no taxes, no problem. But it's that when it has to cross that line, that generational line to the kids, that's when the taxes are going to get paid. And that's what I'm going to
Yep.
talk about today, is like that line.
Yep.
And it's not just the RSP. So I'm going to talk about I talk about 3 different buckets. There's the red bucket. Let's see if I can get a nice red color going here. So you got the red bucket. You got, where are we here? You got the green bucket. I'll use this dark green here. And then I've got the orange bucket, which is kind of in between. Let's see if I get a good orange here. I don't have the most savvy sense of color, but I think I did pretty well there. So when I say red, what I mean is that it's going to be fully taxable.
Okay.
So RSP, so basically, any income that someone makes, like either pension or government benefits, like Canada Pension Plan or old age pension, those are all taxable.
Mm-hmm.
And those can add up. Like if someone has some sort of a pension in retirement, plus monthly benefits that can add up to thousands, this could be thousands of dollars a month. So if someone passes away, let's say halfway through the year, they've got, and just as an example, like let's say someone passes away, halfway through the year, they've got 6 months worth of these payments that have come in to be tacked on. So this is how I look at it. It's okay. You've got that income that was coming in. So you've got if someone has a pension, like I said, not a lot of my clients do, but they're out there. CPP, old age pension, like these are all the things that could be adding up towards taxes. RSP, like I said, arguably the most popular place for people to save money. Not uncommon for me to find people in their 60s or 70s who have in the ballpark of $1 million saved up in there. I'm not saying everyone does, but it's not uncommon.
Okay.
And I don't know how many times I've asked somebody, like, well, when you pass away, how much of this do you want to go to your kids? And they say, well, I want all of it to go to my kids. I'm like, do you think that's what's going to happen? And some people will say yes, because they just don't know. They'll say, yeah, I think that's what's going to happen. I'll say, that's absolutely not what's going to happen. The only exception to this is if someone has like a disabled child or grandchild they're taking care of. There are some tax things you can do, but otherwise it's going to cross that tax line.
Okay.
So this is the red bucket. So you can't do a whole lot about the money you're making, but as far as savings goes, this is like the RSP. The other example is something called a LIRA. If someone worked at a job that had a pension, but they didn't stay there long enough to get it, that oftentimes gets paid out as what's called a LIRA.
Okay.
Again, 100% taxable if it has to be cashed out at any given moment. So let's say this is it, like RSP plus the different government money that's coming in plus a pension. If I assume that someone, and I'll just assume someone's got $1 million in their RSP and they've made like 30 grand from these other places, I'm going to bring up a tax calculator so people know that I am like legit. These are the legit numbers. So I said 30, let's say like, yeah, they didn't make a ton of money in income, but they made, they have $1 million sitting in their RSP. So every province is different, but I'll just go to Ontario. The taxes payable would be $512,615. Average tax rate 49.77, marginal tax rate of 53%. So in all, like basically this is what I draw for people. If they've got that kind of money saved up, it's going to be, so here's the whole estate. Half of it's going to go to their kids, their loved ones, their charity, and half of it's going to go to taxes. If they just keep that going and don't do anything about it, that's what they're going to end up seeing.
Gotcha.
So then we've got the orange bucket. The orange bucket is more of the capital gain bucket. So that's your secondary residence. And I didn't even put any of this on. Like this would all get tacked on at a 50% rate. So secondary property, like a cottage is a very common thing in Canada, where a family might have bought a cottage back in the 60s for like 20, 30 grand. And it's in a place near Toronto that's very popular. And the value is now of the land alone could be like $1 million right now. And so they have a capital gain of potentially $1 million that they would have to pay taxes on half of it.
Do you know if it changes if the property's in the United States, if they own a secondary home in like Arizona? Because I know a lot of Canadians that have a second home right down the street in my neighborhood.
Yeah, it's a good question. It's been a while since I've dug deep into international property, but I'm pretty sure it's the same deal.
Okay.
Because in Canada, you get taxed on worldwide income.
Oh, really?
And well, like it's all going to get lumped together, unless you've suspended residency. Okay. It's all going to get lumped together, which most people haven't. Most people don't suspend residency unless they go teaching overseas. You lose
the health insurance benefits, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And even Canadians, they have to be careful not to stay out of the country for more than 6 months in any given year. And there's all these formulas they have to keep in mind so they don't lose residency. Yeah, because it takes a while to reestablish residency and get your healthcare back and all that. So
okay.
I can look into it, but I'm pretty sure like the last time I had to deal with a property, it was yes, it was going to get lumped in with everything else.
Gotcha.
And it's a whole nother thing to talk about executors. I do an executor training because a lot of people in Canada are afraid of being an executor. I don't know what it's like in the States, but it's a big responsibility to make sure a will gets executed the way that the person intended. So there's things like executor insurance up here in case anyone gets sued because they were an executor and other people in the family think that they didn't do a good job. I mean, like it's a big responsibility.
Yeah.
So yeah, secondary properties in the States is definitely a big part of planning is to make sure that that's accounted for. Sure. So secondary property, cottages, like I was saying. So, and also like non-registered investments. So investments that are not inside of a specific government, vehicle. A lot of people have loose stocks sitting around that are fully taxable. Like a lot of people I meet are like, oh yeah, my parents bought me this stock when I was young. And it's just been sitting around. Those are usually going to be 100% capital gains. So capital gains. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was going to ask, like, do you guys use up there? Is it like Robinhood popular? The trading app? Are there like day traders that have their money in like investment accounts that they can run kind of on the side? Would that fall into this category as well?
Yeah. Okay. There are some apps like that are popular here. Yeah. So if someone is buying stocks outside of their RSP or outside of their TFSA, that's going to be a non-reg capital gain.
Okay.
Stocks is the place where you're potentially going to see the biggest, with mutual funds, it's less so because there's a lot of internal offsets and stuff like that. So I don't usually see as much non-reg taxes on the mutual funds.
Cool.
And another quick thing I was actually going to say is in Canada, we have something called the estate administrative tax, where you also send approximately 1.5% of the value of your estate to taxes as well. Kind of forgot about that. The estate administrative tax.
Every year?
No, in that year of death.
In that year of death, that's just tapped on top.
Yep. And the acronym is EAT, which is kind of funny.
The government
eats away at it. So yeah, 1.5 isn't like, I mean, that's nothing to like I've met people who have $1 million and that means they're going to lose 15,000 to the estate administrative tax. Again, that's for everything that goes through the will. So it's a bit of a different so I'm not going to talk a lot about that today, but that's also a different level of planning I help people with is what should go through the will, what should not go through the will. Because a lot of people think everything should go through the will, but in fact, you can name beneficiaries on your RSP, for example.
Without going through the will.
You can name, if you put your non-registered money in the right kind of stuff, you can name a beneficiary on that too.
In Canada, are you required to have a will?
You're not required to have a will. No, okay. About 50% of people have wills.
Okay.
That's the last statistic I heard. In Ontario, I think 49% of the population has a will. So half of people don't. I highly, highly, highly recommend people get wills because if you don't have one, like the mess I've seen when someone doesn't have a will among
Oh
family,
yeah, it's a mess.
is a,
Ugly. It can
it's,
ruin families.
it can ruin. I've definitely, I've seen,
Yeah.
I've had people. So a bit ago, I gave an estate planning talk, and this person showed up, and she was like 21, and I was like, "What are you doing here?" And
Oh,
she said, "I'm here because my dad doesn't talk to my aunt anymore, because when my grandparents passed away, their will was all messed up, and it caused all this tension between the kids. They either didn't have a will, or I think they didn't have a will, and there's all this tension between the kids, and they're like, they weren't on the best of terms, and after this, they'll probably never speak to each other ever again." So she was coming to my talk as a 21-year-old, in all likelihood decades away from passing away, because she saw what it can do to her family. So she wanted to be informed as to, so to educate her own parents, because she didn't want the same thing to happen to her and her brother. So yeah, wills,
good for
and
her.
people, yeah.
Yeah, that's good for her. I mean, like for
Yeah, definitely. And people come to me like I had a client. She was 92 years old, and she was like, "Oh, yeah, I have a will. It was from like 1980 something." And I was like, "You got to get that updated because rules have changed." And she's like, "Oh, like they make things so difficult, lawyers. I'm just gonna make my own will." And I was like, "Look, I was like, how much does a will cost? Like, it's in the hundreds. It's not in the thousands usually." I was like, "Just get it done. You don't have to worry about this."
Is that
She
something
pat.
you do? Do you do anything like that for your clients, that when you work with them, if they're overwhelmed by it, do you have like a lawyer that does wills that you
Oh
have a
yeah.
relationship with, that you can make their life easier to kind of like make a referral for them?
Absolutely. Yeah. I've got
Yeah,
lawyers. I've got contacts with lawyers in several provinces for
cool.
people who have corporations or don't, because if you have a corporation, the corporation needs its own will. So it's a
Yep.
whole different ballgame. But
Yep.
personal wills, absolutely. I've got a whole bank of lawyers that I refer people to
Awesome.
consistently, who answer all your questions, ask you the right questions. That's the other big thing I've learned about wills, is you want to work with someone who's asking the right questions, because a lot of times it's just like this
Always.
boilerplate, I'm going to fill this out. But if you've got
Mm-hmm.
kids, you've got properties, I mean, you need someone who's like digging a little bit deeper. So, I mean, one of my favorite lawyers to send people to is actually, he used to be a real estate lawyer, and then now he does wills, and he actually used to be a real estate agent. And so he has a whole different view on things, of like seeing how things have gone wrong. So no, definitely refer people to accountants and lawyers when needed. So
Cool.
this client of mine, 92, every time I saw her, "Did you update that will?" No. And she had about $800,000, but luckily we had put it, most of it, she had most of it non-resident. We put most of it here. She told me she got her will done. She passed away. The kids came to me and they said she never updated her will. We found an old will from 1980 something. And the good news is that most of her money was going to bypass the will, because I had already done that on the investing side of things. If I hadn't done that, it would have been a mess. It would have been a mess because she had not updated her will. So got to update the will. And then you got the green bucket. In Canada, the green bucket is the tax-free savings account, your principal residence. What else? Life insurance. And that's about it.
Okay.
Green bucket, not a ton of things that are in the green bucket. So the tax-free savings account we've talked a bit about.
Mm-hmm.
Once you turn 18, you can start putting money into this account. As long as you're 18 in the year it started back in like 09, you can put money in that. You can name a beneficiary. You can even name what's called a successor holder, which means like if I were to pass away, my wife wouldn't just get the money. She'd actually take over the whole account, which is kind of cool. So she can actually keep benefiting from the tax-free nature of that account. You don't get a tax credit for putting in, but it grows tax free. You take it out tax free, goes to your bypasses the estate, bypasses the will. If you name beneficiaries, like goes tax free to whoever you name. So it's a pretty sweet deal. Especially now that the amount that you can put in has been going up. When it started, it was only like 5,000, so it was kind of a little bit, but now it's like closer to 70,000. So it's getting pretty popular. Principal residence, as long as you have not named your children as like a co-owner, because that can kind of mess things up, that goes tax-free. And then life insurance, as long as you've named beneficiaries. If you name the estate as a beneficiary, it'll get tied up with the estate administrative tax, but you can name
Okay.
beneficiaries and life insurance.
Okay.
So what I do when I sit down with people is I look at, what I do is I first get a look at their existing situation. I say, okay, if this is your, sorry, let me erase these marks I got here. If this is your estate, and let's just say we had that client who had in the neighborhood of $1 million total in savings, and I wasn't even talking about property or anything like that. And we do the calculation, and basically 50% of it is going to go to their loved ones, and 50% of it is going to go to taxes. Most people are not happy with this. Some people, in all fairness, some people are like, my kids are okay. They don't need my money. Let it ride. But most people I get in front of say, wow, Is there something I can do about this? And the answer overall is yes. If we're smart and strategic, what I do is I can't handle this circle. Let me try to make it a little bit better here. I just can't.
That's funny.
Let me see. Pressure's on. Oh no. Oh gosh. Oh no. It's getting ugly. I'm just gonna draw one if I have to, but now I'm trying to stay within the lines and everything, and I'm like getting on the edge of my drawing pad here.
That's way better.
Okay, we'll deal with it. Okay, so what I do is I say, look, so I mean, one of the easiest ways to take care of this and the most underutilized ways to take care of this is to put their money somewhere. So I ask people, I say, look, some of this money that's going to go to taxes anyway, why don't we take some of it out earlier than you're forced to take it out and put it somewhere that the day you sign up for it, you already create this room that's going to come in and take care of some of these taxes. And people are like, hold on, how does this work? I say, okay, imagine if you had an account where you make an initial deposit of a couple $1,000 and it's worth a couple $100,000 and it swoops in the day you die to take care of this tax bill. And it grows every year, guaranteed component of growth and dividend component of growth. The room that grows is vested, meaning that your value cannot drop once it has grown, pays out completely tax-free in 5 to 10 business days once the company has a copy of your death certificate. Like people start saying, yeah, this makes a lot of sense. This makes a lot of sense. I'm like, what's it called? What's it called? And I'm like, life insurance.
And they're like, no.
And they're like, no. Actually, funny story. I read this the other day and I thought it was perfect for this. So imagine there's somebody in the desert and they're dying of thirst and they're crawling and they finally find a road and they're like, oh, I just wish a car would come by. I just wish a car would come by and save my life. And off in the horizon, they finally see a car coming down the road and it's coming and they're like, oh, thank God I'm saved. I'm saved. I'm saved. The car comes closer and closer, closer. It's a green car. They're like, oh, I hate green. And the car slows down and they're like, they wave them on. They're like, I don't want your help. I don't like green cars.
No.
So like sometimes financial planning is exactly like this. Like I will meet people and they will be like, whoa. This all sounds really good. Is this a new thing? And I'm like, no, it's been around in Canada since the 1840s. And they're like, and does it really work this way? I'm like, yeah, it really works this way. I'm like, wow, how come no one's ever told me about this? And I'm like, well, they might have. I'm like, this is called life insurance. And some people are like, cool. Like, I didn't know life insurance did this. And other people are like, oh, I don't believe in life insurance. It's like, well, it is the green car that could save your bacon when it comes to estate planning. Let's take a look at it to see if it works.
Yeah. People have been probably told about it. They just probably haven't been educated about it. There's a difference being like sold something and educated around something. And that's the problem with most life insurance people is like, all they do is try to sell based on needs and whatever. And it's not a matter of like, the reality is like, listen, the person who belongs to this circle and that's their financial life, to take a sliver out of that to create this other room to take care of the taxes, they don't need that. The question is, what do you want to happen? Like, when you die, I got news for you. You don't know what's going to end up happening with your legacy when your family moves on. That's not a need. You don't need life insurance. It's like, do you want it to provide more opportunity for your family from a legacy perspective later down the road? And so I think it's really important. If you're looking at life insurance as a need, you're looking at it wrong. It's like, that's why I always kind of say you need to think about what are your objectives? What do you really want to happen? And then you can reverse engineer and say, okay, what is the best way to accomplish that? Right. And that's what this conversation is all about.
Oh, absolutely. And so then what I do is I run a lot of numbers to make sure it makes sense. Because I have had people come to me who wanted to do this and I told them it wasn't a good idea for different reasons. Like sometimes if someone's spending way too much of their money and they're going to burn, like sometimes I meet people, it's pretty rare, but they're burning through this at a good clip to begin with. And I'm like, we need to figure out what's going to work for you from like, budgeting standpoint, like not budgeting so much, but like if you're going to burn through this in 10 years, like what are you going to live off of when you're 75? Like just an example I've come across in the past. But a lot of people, they say, once they start taking this money out when they're forced to at age 71, or they see it coming, they see it kind of on the horizon. They're like, a lot of times they're like, I don't need that money necessarily, or I don't need all of it. Like they've got investment properties or they've got, other money kicking around or who knows what they've got going on. And they say like, I don't necessarily need all this when I'm 71. It's actually a somewhat common problem. And some people might say, well, that's a really good problem to have. And it is kind of a good problem to have. But at the end of the day, most people, what I say to people is I'm like, just picture the impact if someone says to me, I want this money, as much of this money as possible to go to my grandkids. I'm like, well, paint me a picture of what that could do for them. And they're like, well, that means that means in this crazy world where house prices just keep skyrocketing, like Canada is going through like this craziness where every time I meet with people who are trying to save up enough to buy a house, they can't, because they can't save up fast enough to keep
Can't
up
keep
with the
up with
down
the
payment.
yeah.
Like, what if my grandkids could just buy a house? What if my grandkids could go to school? What if or kids, what if my kids didn't have to worry about retirement as much? Like, and I'm like, okay, cool. Like, you've painted me this picture of like the huge impact this could have in the lives of your family or your church or your charity, like charities that are running on a shoestring budget. What if they could suddenly have a whole bunch of money to do what they want to impact the lives of other people?
I know a
Now
lot of
paint me
people
a
do
picture
this
of,
with their churches as well, right?
yeah. And it's like, and now paint me a picture of what you think is going to happen if you just let the default amount go to taxes. Some of the taxes is going to go to good stuff, sure, but you have zero control over how it gets spent. Like, some of that taxes could go for defense. Some of it could go to, I don't know, causes you don't even care about. Who knows, right? So it's really a question of like, having some control, having some say in what happens. And so I run the numbers. I'm like, okay, should we start taking out early? That's usually what we're looking at, is if someone has retired before the age of 71 and they've got a whole bunch of money in this, we actually take it out earlier than they're forced to take it out to lower the total amount in there. We take it out and we start putting it into, so basically what I do is I'll go back to this red, orange, green.
Yeah.
What we do is we just little by little start taking it from the red, putting what we can in the orange, putting what we can in the green. So I have a couple that became my clients about, I guess 5-ish years ago, and they knew they had this problem when they got in front of me. And the first time I met with them, I said, well, we could get some life insurance and that would help solving it. And they're like, no, it seems, whatever. They're like, it seems like a lot of money. I don't think that's going to work. And then like a year later, they reached back out to me and they said, wait a second, like, we've thought about this and we think what you're talking about makes a lot of sense. So we sat down and looked at the numbers again. So basically I've moved them, I think basically they were all over here when I met with them. Like, or 80% was in the red bucket and 10% was in the orange and 10% was in the green. So like basically I moved them from here. I'll just show you. Like, I think it was about this when I met them. It was like 80% here, 10% here, and 10% here. Then every year we just kept leapfrogging from one to the other, one to the other.
What do you do? Like 5 to 10% a year, kind of like there?
Yeah. Yeah. Like, so we look at basically like, do you need the money? How much of the money do you need to live off of? Right. So they take that out, they spend it. Whatever they need, whatever they don't need, but is still like within a relatively reasonable tax bracket, we take out the most to adapt for that. Like, so let's just say, if they took out an extra $10,000 and it would still be in the 30% range, we do it. Like, we don't take so much that
you have to look at the tax thresholds and like take it on a year by year basis and how that works. Yeah, that makes sense.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, a lot of people, if they're retired, if they're a certain age, they can split their retirement income, which is a huge help in these cases.
Yeah.
So they can lower their average tax rate quite a bit. So yeah, I work on that line very carefully between, and I talk, if I need to talk to the accountant, I talk to the accountant. How much can we take out before they jump to that next tax bracket? Let's do it. So we, and what of that extra that comes out, we put it as much as possible into the green. Like, we fill up the tax-free savings account. We get a life insurance that's reasonable. And so this couple went from 80%, as of now, off the top of my head, I'd say it's probably more like this. It's probably about 10%.
Wow.
It's probably about 50%.
And you were able to do that in a 5-year period?
Yeah. Yeah. And like, as of year after next, it'll be nothing's left in the red. Sorry, next year, nothing will be left in the red. It'll all be a mix of orange and green. And, I mean, the good problem to have is their non-registered account I'm investing it actively and it's growing fast. So, I'm like, all right, we don't have the TFSA room isn't growing fast enough to keep up with it, but at least it's a capital gain and not a total income. Like, they're not going to send as much taxes, but yeah, I'd say within the next, every year going forward after next year, it's going to be like 50-50 orange and green. And then little by little, every year it's going to move more like, 10% more in the green. And cool. I mean, the beauty of it is the second they did this, it shifted from red to green in a big way, right?
Yeah,
like,
totally.
The second that they signed up for life insurance, the table shifted from red to green, like percentage wise, in a pretty big way. Because
the reality is in retirement, I mean, you should have enough of a buffer where you can afford at least some life insurance to help eat into that exposure, so to speak. I mean,
Yeah.
You know, I mean, you should, if you planned well getting to that point in time where you're going to be
Yeah.
dealing with this. One of the things I always like to tell people is like,
Shoot.
life insurance is such an amazing tool. I don't know if you've ever heard this, but I always kind of tell people life insurance is the only thing that will make sure what you want to happen will happen when you want it to happen, whether you're here to see it or not. Right. And it's
Yeah.
like, that comes back to the, like, start with the end in mind, figure out what do you want your legacy to look like? What do you want the rest of your life to look like? What do you want your cash flow to look like? What are your
Yeah.
needs in life? And if you do life insurance properly, whether it's term or permanent or whatever, it will make sure that your objectives are reached. If you work with the right person that understands what they're doing and understands how to, you know, manage these buckets, so to speak. And so I think that's important to understand. So,
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And it's consistently like, if anyone's watching this and they're thinking, how come I didn't know this before? Or how come no one told me? Or how come my accountant didn't tell me? You know, like my accountant is consistently sending me people who have this problem. And they're like, no, I've got a guy. I'm invested with someone. And I'm like, well, what do they do? And they're like, oh, they pick stocks. I'm like, cool. Have they ever mapped this out for you? Like, and I literally she has behind her desk on her wall, I printed out like a really nice color, green bucket, red bucket, like printout that my wife put together for me. And people will ask her, what does that mean? And she's like, well, this is what it means, is that, you know, a lot of people are going to lose half of their estate to taxes or more if they're not careful. And the problem is that I think it's so hard for most people to measure the value of the advice that they're getting. And I think a lot of people measure it on, well, do I feel like I'm making a good return in the market? Like that's kind of where a lot of people just stop. And I'm like, yeah, like a good financial planner is helping you do that, sure, on a regular basis, but they're also looking at the long-term goals in mind. Like when I meet with my clients who are in their 40s and 50s, I've worked with enough clients in their 70s, 80s, and 90s to be like, these are the questions you haven't asked me yet, but you're going to be really happy we took care of this problem early on, so you don't have to deal with it later. So that's a big part of my job, is to get people to ask, you know, helping them answer the questions that they haven't asked yet, that they haven't thought of yet. And then also just looking at the big picture, like I'm, you know, getting a good return in the market. Whenever a client says to me like, oh, Galen, you're the best advisor, I made 10% this year. I'm like, yeah, sure. But like the big thing I did on the other side was I saved you some taxes. I
but
made sure
that's
that
not why I'm awesome.
Yeah, like, yeah, sure. I'm glad you think that's awesome. And I did do that. But like, this is the other stuff we're doing. And don't lose sight of that, because it's like, that's far too much what people come to the table thinking that their plan should be measured by. And it's like, yeah, sure. What if someone gets 10% a year in the market and then they lose 50% of it to taxes? Like, it's not a big win.
Yeah. You're like, yes, I am awesome, but that's not why.
Yeah, exactly.
That's fantastic. That's awesome. Well, rock and roll, man. Is there anything else on this you think we need to cover, or is that button it up?
That's pretty good. I mean, like,
awesome. No, I think it's great.
What I do when I meet with people is the first thing I do is I take a look at where do they want to be and where are they actually, and what can we do to bridge that gap? Because I've met with people from, like I've said, all different levels of having the complexity of this problem. And it's always a question of where do you wish you could be around estate planning, and where are you right now, and what are the steps we need to take to bridge that gap? And it doesn't take that long to do it. I've done it enough times that I've got some spreadsheets that do it pretty quickly. And, you know, I dig deep into the numbers behind the scenes and the accounting and the taxation and all that. But the conversation is a fairly quick, and, you know, it's and for a lot of people, they've never looked at the big picture. Like a lot of people, when they sit down with me, they're like, I don't know where everything is, to be honest. Like, I mean, it's not uncommon to meet people in retirement right now that have 10 plus sources of income from all the different accounts that they've accrued over the years, and properties and all that. So like, to actually take the time to organize all that sometimes is a huge win just on its own.
Yeah, that's crazy. Sorry, I just totally got distracted. I had a notification come across my thing. Rush Limbaugh died. I just saw.
Whoa.
Did you see that?
I did not see that.
Rush Limbaugh just died. So everybody will know when we're filming this video. So, yeah, that's crazy. So rest in peace, Rush, man. That's crazy. But yeah, man. Well, so, back to topic, I guess. If anybody has any questions about any of this stuff, I know it can kind of feel overwhelming, whatnot. I mean, absolutely reach out to Galen. I'll put a link in the description in the video below. If you're Canadian and you are having any level of success at all, or even if you're feeling like you kind of are looking for a path or like a GPS to get to that success financially, I'm Galen's a good guy to have a chat with, to see if he can help you. Cause I'm 100% certain after my hours and hours of talks with him at this point in time, that he is an amazing wealth of resources for you. So go ahead and look at the link below, click on it, set up a time with Galen, have a conversation. And yeah, that's it. Until next video, have a blessed, inspirational day, and we'll see y'all in the next video.